Good evening. I'm Michael Holt.
And I'm Sharon Calvin. Welcome to the KTLA 5 News at 6. Tonight, we will bring you that speech live, as well as expert analysis from our two guests.
We are joined by political science professor Peter Mathews and political analyst Matt Klink, who will be weighing in throughout the night. We want to bring in our guests, Peter and Matt.
Yeah, well, days leading up to this, of course, the budget definitely a hot topic, and we're talking about $54 billion in military spending is one of them. And McCain, a staunch critic about that, saying it's not enough.
And some people say it's way too much, because that's a 10% increase. And at this time, we spend more money from the United States military budget than the next 7 countries put together. And we're wondering about how much that can continue when he's trying to spend money on infrastructure and other spending which needs money. And so you can't just take it from thin air or drive up the debt too high. There's a lot of controversy about that $54 billion increase.
And we're referring to, of course, when President Obama addressed Congress in 2009 and Republican Representative Joe Wilson screamed, "You lie," when he was talking about, when then President Obama was talking about health care. So we anticipate perhaps that the Democrats, as you mentioned, that they'll be a little bit calmer tonight. But there's a lot of contention nonetheless. I mean, he needs to get a broader spectrum of his audience tonight. And this is the first time that we're seeing him since the inauguration address a wider audience in the nation. Do we have the title of what they're going for, optimism here? Do we see that happening tonight?
Well, half the audience are going to be Democrats who are going to be against him and very silent. And also they're going to probably they are bringing guests who represent his constituencies who were hurt by him. The Muslim Americans, many Democrats are bringing immigrants, and the address for the president's response will be coming from a dreamer, an undocumented young person who's here. She'll be giving the Spanish language address addressed to the country in response to the president, too.
Let's talk about the guests that President Trump have here at Congress, here on Capitol Hill. We have a local connection, and this is Jamil Shaw Sr. He is the father of Jamil Shaw, who was killed in 2008 rather, and he was killed by an illegal immigrant. Let's talk a little bit about that and how the guests also play a role about what Trump will touch on during this speech.
He's going to make a big point about deporting the criminal illegal immigrants, the ones who have been accused of a crime. But he may be shifting to allowing some path to not citizenship, but to some form of legalization as well. So he's kind of like waffling on which way he's going to go with the undocumented workers. With Jamil in the audience, though, he's going to portray that some of the undocumented people over here have committed crimes.
A potential pathway for those who haven't committed serious crimes.
Who have not committed serious crimes. That's correct.
I am asking all citizens to embrace this renewal of the American spirit. I am asking all members of Congress to join me in dreaming big and bold and daring things for our country. I am asking everyone watching tonight to seize this moment, believe in yourselves, believe in your future, and believe once more in America. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States.
And there you have the first presidential address to the joint Congress there in Washington by President Trump. Very interesting, the tone that he carried. We are joined again by our political science professor, Peter Mathews, and political analyst, Matt Klink, as we kind of go through his speech that lasted about an hour and 2 minutes. Your thoughts on the tone of his speech tonight first?
Much more thematic and positive compared to the inaugural address, obviously. And he made some very substantive points regarding free trade and TPP as opposed to fair trade, keeping jobs here, also education. He talked about school vouchers and choices. I would like to point out that school vouchers would be one thing to let people have choice, but it will also take money out of the public school system. So there's some concerns that we have about some of the proposals, but overall the tone was very positive.
But I think that the most emotional moment really came when he pointed to the widow of Owens, who was part of that Yemen raid, the first serviceman to die from Special Forces during his presidency. Tell me what your thoughts are about that moment, which garnered an applause of support for the widow for over a minute.
And to be sure, the applause could be heard from coast to coast as well, Peter.
Certainly, and when you're applauding, a fallen soldier, it's very poignant. Yeah. People feel it from the heart. And the raid itself in Yemen there were problems with it at times, but still, the fact that a soldier died and his wife was there feeling the hurt and pain, and so was the country with her, was quite uplifting.
We are awaiting the Democratic response, the official Democratic response from former Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear. Supporters of the Affordable Care Act have often pointed to Kentucky as a model for successful implementation of the law.
You know, I think that what's also interesting is if we compare the last speech, the inaugural address, to this address, the joint session of Congress, we saw something very dark. A lot of people found his inauguration speech very dark and saying things like American carnage. We didn't hear that. Tonight we heard Buy American, Hire American. We also heard America is ready to lead, strong, proud, and free. Your thoughts on that?
Well, he did mention a few things, such as the millions of Americans that are really out of work.
Right.
And he mentioned, I know for a fact that 62% of our workforce is employed. That's a very low workforce participation rate compared to like several years ago it was 65%. So that is something he mentioned. He mentioned the 43% poverty rate, 43 million Americans in poverty. So he's still not shrinking from saying that things have to be done. There's a lot to be done still here. The last 8 years has been slow in terms of recovery. He didn't talk about a carnage. That's the good thing. He didn't talk about fake news, you know. He has to keep it an uplifting platform because now he's in charge. He can't keep blaming the past anymore. He's got to take it forward. And I'm interested to see what he talks about when he talks about fair trade instead of free trade. What does it mean by it exactly? That Mexico should accept more of our products? How about the fact that Mexican workers are paid so little that they can't even buy our products? So you have to raise the workers' wages in Mexico and other countries to be able to buy our exports.
But is that a U.S. problem?
He's not talking about that.
That's not a U.S. problem.
Well, wait a minute. U.S. recognized the party that was actually for free trade, not fair trade, when the election took place back in 1988. So the U.S. foreign policy does, in fact, influence which parties come to power sometimes. We should take the right side on that.
Let's get back to Obamacare and the president putting a bullseye on that policy, that Affordable Care Act policy that implemented by the president. Very, very critical of it, mincing no words. Here's the sound.
Obamacare is collapsing, and we must act decisively to protect all Americans. Action is not a choice, it is a necessity.
All right. Action is not a choice. It's a necessity.
And he has to drive that home. They are on such a rigorous schedule. They have to get Obamacare repealed and replaced before they can move on to tax reform. And he laid down his marker of what he wants, which is continuing to cover pre-existing conditions, which is already in Obamacare. But once you hit that, it deviates pretty radically. He talked about health savings accounts. He talked about block granting Medicare. He talked about basically using more of the market, tort reform. He talked about allowing people to sell insurance across state lines. Those are the meat and potatoes of Republican health care replacement plans that have been swirling around Washington, D.C. for the last 7 years that really haven't gotten a lot of attention.
They can't even find agreement amongst Republicans.
Right.
That's right, because Obamacare was a Republican plan originally. We need a single-payer system, much more like the other countries that have half the cost of health care per person than we do, and yet you have them, Obama and both Trump, tinkering around the edges here, while the costs of health care go up in tremendous amounts of money, like as he pointed out. So you're going to have a much more efficient way of delivering the health care on a non-profit basis. Our neighbor Canada does it very well, actually, but I don't see too many health insurance companies that will support that.
Vermont rejected it because it was too expensive, and the Colorado voters just defeated single payer. Anybody who thinks that the government can deliver better coverage at a lower cost is absolutely nuts.
We do it in Medicare for the elderly right here.
I would disagree.
And that's what we're hearing.
Medicare we have here.
There's a very small window of time for them to reach agreement on this. Does it happen?
No. I think that it's going to be, I think that I would be surprised if they get Obamacare done, or repeal and replacement of Obamacare within the next month. I think it's probably going to drag out, which means that tax reform will get pushed back until the third or fourth quarter of this year, at the earliest.
Well, even President Trump was quoted as saying yesterday, who knew that it was so complicated, health care?
Yeah, shocker, right?
What a shocker. Everyone else knew it.
Say, welcome to the party, Donald.
Welcome to the party. Something that was interesting that he mentioned in his speech was something new, and that was voice. The victim of immigration crime engagement engagement, that he's ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims, and that office is called Voice, which is what I just mentioned.
You could hear the collective gasp from the Democrat side of the room when he announced that policy, and I think that it will be very controversial on both sides of half of America is saying absolutely it's the right thing to do, and the other half of America is saying, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we don't need. This is not uniting people, this is dividing people.
Peter, does it light another fire?
Absolutely, yes. And I think it's a very bad situation for Trump in that sense. He's got to unite the people and not divide them with these policies and proposals. The real problem with this immigration is that, once again, undocumented folks don't come here for the weather or for the great food that we have, which we do. They could stay in Mexico and other parts, but they come here for the jobs. And that's because of free trade and NAFTA, as Bill Clinton pushed through with Republicans, bipartisan support for free trade, not fair trade, not higher wages, not higher environmental standards, which we should have. And Trump should be talking about that.
Do you want to take a look at the bite? Let's see how the Democrats reacted to that moment.
And we must support the victims of crime. I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called Voice, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. We are providing a voice to those who have been ignored by our media and silenced by special interests. Joining us.
Yeah, there you hear the jeers. Not cheers, jeers, lots of them.
What was interesting, Micah, is that we heard pre-speech.
Here's our Democratic response, Matt. We'll interrupt you and listen to it live.
I'm here in Lexington, Kentucky, some 400 miles from Washington. But we've always come together when we remember that we are one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
There, the official Democratic response to the president's speech tonight. Former Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear. Interesting choice by the Democratic Party of speaker and of audience there, making a clear play for President Trump's meat and potatoes.
I was going to say that was a very Anglo-American room. There was not a minority. I don't think there was one minority in that background that I saw. A clear play to the Rust Belt states that Donald Trump won by many counts, surprising over them. So over Hillary.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's all that we have the time for. We want to thank our guests. Thank you, Peter, for being here with us. Matt Klink, again, also our analyst here on the KTLA News special edition of the first presidential address to a joint session of Congress.
We'll have complete wrap-up and analysis tonight on the news at 10 and 11 of the president's address, as well as the rest of the day's news. Along with Cher Calvin, I'm Michael Ullman for all of us here at KTLA. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tonight at 10.